Jalen Lott signs and Chris Henry Jr. is still out there.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. And thank you all so much for helping make Locked On the number one sports podcast network out there. The 2026 receiver room. Should we just give up on 2025 and just go all in on 2026 because of the receiver room? No, we shouldn't. That would be foolish. But it's tempting. It's very tempting. And we've got a lot of great submissions for the good old Spencer scale of agreement. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So, the early signing window goes from December 3rd to December 5th, which means that Chris Henry Jr. is either going to commit somewhere on Friday, December 5th, or he could draw it out. And let me tell you, there is a small part of me. There's a decently sized part of me that wants it to get drawn out. As someone who's in the Oregon content space, man, I could get a lot of content off of Chris Henry Jr., but guess what? I am not that selfish, so hopefully he signs with Oregon sometime on Friday. The Brian Hartline part of this equation has changed everything dramatically, and on Thursday, 4 crystal ball predictions, insider flips, whatever you want to call them, came in for Chris Henry to flip to the Ducks. So if that happens on Friday, I don't even know how many ramifications there are. I can't conceptualize them all in my head right now because the idea of Oregon pulling the number one wide receiver in back-to-back classes, that's just not something that happens. And yeah, this doesn't happen if Brian Hartline doesn't decide to leave Ohio State. Not for Penn State, of course. I don't know why. I like Brian Hartline. I don't know what Penn State is doing. Let me just put that out there. They're going after Matt Campbell at Iowa State, who's a really good football coach. I think he could do well at Penn State. They passed on Brian Hartline. Why? Why? I don't really know. Anyway, so bringing this back to the Ducks, of course, not what they did to Penn State earlier this year. Like the death spiral that Oregon beating Penn State in double overtime in Happy Valley when game day was in town. I don't know that there's been anything like it. I can't remember a big Oregon win over the years that has led to this level of a drop-off. Now, Penn State's mismanagement is a part of that. But anyway, we stray from the point. Oregon is in position to take advantage of an unlikely situation that has, in fact, arisen, of course, with Brian Hartline scheduled to be the next head coach at South Florida. So, for Oregon going after Chris Henry here, Jalen Lott committed. So I'm not surprised by that because he had been verbally committed to the Ducks. I should say he signed. So everybody that Oregon had on their verbal commitment list, plus the 2 guys I talked about, the defensive backs, in the 3rd segment of yesterday's show. If you missed that, you can go check it out. They have all signed their national letters of intent, and they will be Oregon Ducks. And what a great position for Oregon to be in on 2 fronts. Number 1, Jalen Lott, a 5-star who's a top 25 player in the country, signed with the Ducks. Number 3 wide receiver, according to 24/7's composite rankings, and the number 3 player in the state of Texas, which, as we all know, is rather fertile recruiting ground. He commits, and you can still go get Chris Henry. And I talked yesterday on my show about how I thought that it was more likely Oregon would get 2 than it was they would get 1. My suspicion of what happened here is when Oregon got into the Chris Henry Jr. sweepstakes, they had to go and do a little re-recruiting or a little extra emphasis with Jalen Lott, because I'm sure he caught wind of that and was wondering, wait a minute, what does this mean for me? And I do not believe that Jalen Lott sticking with Oregon is automatically indicative that Chris Henry is not going to sign with the Ducks. Frankly, if you'd asked me before I recorded my show yesterday, I would have said the most likely outcome is Oregon flips Chris Henry and Jalen Lott goes somewhere else. Well, nope, he's coming to be an Oregon Duck. Gatlinburg, back from a 2-year mission next year. A couple of 5 stars coming in the class, and Chris Henry could be another one. Like that, I'm going to talk more about the receiving core later. But Oregon is on an absolute heater in this 2026 class that mostly, of course, got built over the summer, but that they could flip not just a player this late in the cycle, but a player of this caliber. I think this would be the biggest kind of late recruiting cycle win for Oregon since Josh Connerly. That was Dan Lanning's first major, worked out pretty well, by the way. That was Dan Lanning's first major early recruiting win. Because he was waiting until the spring months, not long after Lanning had been hired, because he was announced, Dan Lanning was, as Oregon's coach in December, as Will Stein, of course, has been at Kentucky, Tosh Lupoi at Cal. He got announced. He stayed with Georgia, won a national championship, got to the Ducks, and then Josh Connerly, the number 1 offensive tackle in the class of 2022, winds up picking Oregon. This would be on that sort of level. And I felt that one was more likely than this because nothing else, I don't think, had to happen for Oregon to get into the sweepstakes in a significant way. But this is why you just never know. You don't burn bridges. You say, you know what? We're not going to get, and this has been a theme for Oregon's 2026 recruiting class. The number 1 class in the country right now belongs to USC. I believe if Oregon, on 24/7's website anyway, I believe if Oregon got Chris Henry Jr., they would take over and have the number 1 overall class. I'm not overly clear, frankly, on how all the rankings work and whatnot, but I don't know how he wouldn't put them over the top. But USC has a great recruiting class. Theirs is largely built on volume. And it's not that they don't have talented players in it. They definitely do. Oregon is ranked 1 spot behind them with 14 fewer players. And the big game hunting mentality of the Oregon staff in this 2026 cycle has been on display really the entire time. They got down to Jared Curtis, who flipped to Vanderbilt, if you didn't know. Remember when he committed to Georgia back in May? Flipped to Vanderbilt not long ago, which is a crazy statement to say. But that's, of course, where we're at. They went after Ryder Lyons. They went after Cantwell, the number 1 offensive tackle. They were going after those sorts of guys. And there have been reports that have popped out, kind of every couple weeks over the last, 2-3 months or so that Oregon's still trying to get Chris Henry. Oregon's still trying to get Chris Henry. Well, this would be why. Because when you're in a position where you have loaded up enough talent in a particular position group, and you feel like it is worth your time in case something happens, like Brian Hartline leaving Ohio State, to where you could get this guy, but you don't have to have him. That's the luxury position that Oregon finds themselves in, as I'll talk about more in the second segment. Of course they want to get Chris Henry Jr. He might be the best receiver on Oregon's roster the moment he steps foot on campus if he does wind up committing. But does Oregon need him? No. Pretty incredible position to be in, because they've got 2 other 5-star receivers that are coming in for 2026. Gatlinburg is technically 2024. But it's a great position for Oregon to be in, and that they got Jalen Lott to commit. If they land both of them, boy, I get excited thinking about what that could be. That'll be quite the offseason of wide receiver hype for whoever Oregon's offensive coordinator winds up being. That's another interesting angle that just popped in my head as I'm recording the show. If they land Chris Henry Jr., Oregon should be able to go out and get any offensive coordinator really that they want in all of college football. Because your pitch is, hey, as long as Dante Moore comes back, we've got DeCorian Moore, and we might have Evan Stewart, and also we've got Chris Henry, and Gatlinburg's coming in, and Jeremiah McLaughlin's there, and we've got a 5-star tight end, and Kendra Harrison. Pretty good. Pretty good. So let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. That wide receiver room, I'm not done gushing about what that could be. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or their momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment and lets you spice up conference championship weekend. Because you've got not just the big conferences, but you got the MAC, you have got the Sun Belt, you've got the Mountain West. If you want to have some action on any of those games, FanDuel has, of course, got you covered. Point spread, money line, point total, it's all over there. And whoever Oregon winds up playing in the playoff, of course, I'll tell you what the line is, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. This wide receiver room for Oregon, man, it could be so good. So let's start with what we know. We know that Oregon's 2026 receiver room, which could wind up being the most talented in the history of the program, which is something that I just keep saying on the show. And from Junior Adams now to Ross Douglas, if he pulls this off, holy smokes, what a ringing endorsement of that guy if Chris Henry winds up picking the Ducks, in addition to getting Jalen Lott to sign. If that all goes down, Ross Douglas, Himothy, as the kids say. But we know next year, Oregon's wide receiver room will have DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McLaughlin, Gatlin Bear, Jalen Lott, 5-star true freshman. Messiah Hampton could be in the fold. Highly rated 4-star guy in the class. Is Cooper Perry going to be back? Because he's looked pretty darn solid this year. And oh, by the way, Kendra Harrison is coming in, 5-star tight end. Oh, I'm going to talk about Jamari Johnson later on the show as well. I said I was going to do that yesterday. Forgot that was actually in today's rundown. But my everydayers will probably remember that and be like, yeah, it's Spencer, you said you were going to. I did. Made a slight mistake there. Appreciate you all bearing with me. So that level of receiver talent, I don't know how they're all going to get the ball. That's honestly my first reaction. I don't know. I don't know if everybody's going to stay. I don't know if everyone is going to be as happy as they want to be. Because how are these guys all going to be up now? If the injuries in the wide receiver room happen next year as they did this year, then, well, yeah, everyone's going to have a turn in the rotation of being the go-to wideout. But it's great that Oregon has this depth because you are losing Malik Benson. You are losing Gary Bryant Jr. I think Justice Lowe still has another year of eligibility. I don't know if talent-wise he can stack up with the rest of these guys, but he's at least a solid role player to have back there should mass injuries arise, as they have right now. But that brings me to the first SSA of the day. Evan Stewart is coming back next year because he didn't walk on senior day, making next year the best Oregon receiver room of all time. I believe this was actually sent to me before the Chris Henry saga began. So, on Evan Stewart coming back next year, not for the playoff game, which I'll tell you that from what I've been told, there's a non-zero possibility. Nothing's 100%. Nothing's 100%. I'd put him playing in a playoff game at about a 7 right now. Coming back next year, I don't know who's advising him. I don't know what the NFL has told him. I cannot put this any lower than a 6. Now, I am going to put it at a 6 because the decision for Evan Stewart is a legitimately difficult one. It might depend on what the NFL draft scouting community tells him. That can be a very brutal but honest bunch. And how he might test in some hypothetical workouts. Because Evan Stewart, fully healthy, ready to play in the NFL right now. Dude's a stud. We saw that all of last year. And when he wasn't there, made quite the difference from matchup 1 to matchup 2 against Ohio State. There was a lot more at play. But him not being there certainly hurt Oregon's offensive output. If he's in the wide receiver room next year, is he the number 1? Is DeCorian the number 1? DeCorian literally wears number 1, of course. Is Chris Henry the number 1? I literally don't know. I literally do not know. You could assemble, if Chris Henry commits and Evan Stewart comes back, a second string of Oregon receivers that is more singularly talented from a recruiting standpoint than a bunch of Oregon receiver rooms in the past. And they've had some good ones, but the talent they could have in there is crazy. So I'm putting Stewart coming back at a 6. I'd suspect that he could get drafted if he wants to. If he wants to just go and just get taken and he trusts that he's going to be able to figure out his health and that he'll bet on himself, that's an option. That's an option. I don't see how coming off a year in which he might only play in 1 or 2 games total, hopefully it's 4, and Oregon's playing for a national championship, but even then, if he goes crazy in those games, okay, sure, maybe he could give at the NFL the confidence that he's gotten himself physically to a point where he's ready to go to the next level. But I think it's a tough selling point if it's less than 4 games. And what's he even going to look like? How healthy is he going to be? If I were advising him, I'd say, man, I know that there's obviously, as he learned, an injury risk when you play college football. But the upside of him coming back and having a really impactful season, I think is greater than the downside. Because the upside is you get drafted multiple rounds higher. Like with the injury concern, maybe he's a 4th or 5th round pick, as opposed to what his ceiling is, I think, as a wide receiver prospect, which is a 2nd or 3rd, maybe fringe 1st round pick. I think he's probably 2nd or 3rd round guy. But do they see him as that right now? Don't know. Don't know. Wouldn't think so when he hasn't played a season of football since 2024. So I think that's at a 6. And I hope that happens just because I'm going to have to figure out all offseason what is Oregon's new offensive coordinator going to do with that many receivers. What a good problem to have. What a good problem to have. So, the second part of it. Making next year the best Oregon receiver room of all time. Okay, I'll bump that up to a 6.5 with that because I agree with that part of it. I think the core of the SSA is that Evan Stewart comes back. Frankly, even if he doesn't, it could still be the best Oregon receiving core of all time. I mean, if you're lining up Chris Henry Jr. and DeCorian Moore and Jeremiah McLaughlin as your first 3, and your next 3 are Gatlin Bear and Jalen Lott, a pair of 5 stars, Messiah Hampton, who's a stud, and Cooper Perry. By the way, this doesn't even count Dylan Gresham, who's hurt this year, was the standout guy in the spring game. I'm just going to throw it out there just for fun. Kyler Casper could be back next year. Maybe that's the season. I doubt it at this point, but hey, you never know. I think he was going to play some this year, and then he got hurt again, unfortunately. So another SSA here. This is from the Soda Report. Oregon has met expectations this season. I am at a 10. Every year, I expect Oregon to pull in a top 10 class. Their 2026 cycle, by the way, number 2 in the country, according to 24/7. And I expect them to make the playoff. Unless they have a barrage of injuries, they should be able to make the 12-team playoff. And they won't do it every season from now until the end of time. Like in the next 10 years, how many times do you think Oregon makes the playoff? I don't think there's any way that number is less than 5. I don't think it's 10 because you can't do it. I don't think you can do it every time. Football's really hard. A lot of other teams are good with good coaches, good players, and plenty of money as well. But yeah, I think that number is probably 7 or 8. The schedule will be in the future years tougher, and we'll see how the committee treats that in and how many teams are in the playoff. But for this season, yes, Oregon has met my expectations. I would love it if they could wildly exceed my expectations. That is now what we are hoping for. But on meeting expectations, yeah, that's a 10. So if they're going to make a run in the playoffs, guys are going to have to step up. What about the other tight end? First, this episode brought to you by Aura Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap, it's a way to share memories because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it. So when whoever you're getting the gift for plugs it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. I saw one of these in the store the other day and realized how great it looks. It's not just a digital frame. It's not just a screen. It is a really good looking frame. And then a bunch of different photos can roll through. The memories, as I said, are already in there. It looks fantastic. So for a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, which is the exact one I saw in the store the other day, named #1 by Wirecutter. By using promo code COLLEGE at checkout, that's auraframes.com. Promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast, which doesn't surprise me. So order yours now. Get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Check out auraframes.com. So Oregon has arguably the best tight end in all of college football. Kenyon Sadiq, every single mock draft from every outlet I see has got him as the first tight end taken, probably going in the first round. I'm glad Kendra Harrison is coming in because Kenyon Sadiq is just not like everybody else. But you know, one of the guys, the two transfers that have surpassed my expectations the most, I have to put three into this mix. Malik Benson at wide receiver is one. Jaden Kennedy at nickel is another. And Jamari Johnson at tight end. So he's obviously a different body type than Kenyon Sadiq because most tight ends look a lot more like Jamari Johnson and a lot less like Kenyon Sadiq because he's one of one. Jamari Johnson's not going to make diving catches. You're not going to throw 50-50 balls to him on a slot fade or just line him up at wide receiver. He's a traditional, big, athletic tight end who's having a great year. 23 catches, 320 yards, only one touchdown so far. But when Oregon's receiving core has been knocked down by injuries, I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. There's been a lot of 12 personnel usage from Will Stein, who has gotten the Kentucky job for a reason. He's been really good in a lot of different areas. But one in particular is the way that he has adapted Oregon's offense to not being able to roll out the same receiver depth that you can when you have Evan Stewart, who you haven't had all year, DeCorian Moore, and Gary Bryant. And Jamari Johnson has been a guy that has really surged in the last few weeks. And he has made some huge plays, had two big first down catches in the game against Washington. He ended the game with 3 catches for 60 yards. But one of his catches was on, I think, a 3rd down and 10 that led to Oregon getting a field goal in the third quarter to begin the second half and push it to a 2-possession lead. So he's a guy that had an injury in the past and hadn't done a ton as a pass catcher in the lone season that he actually played at Louisville. Last year, he had 13 catches for 158 yards and a touchdown, and his long reception was 29 yards. And plenty of you and myself had a back and forth, shall we say, about the overall depth of Oregon's tight end room. And Jamari Johnson has definitely passed what my expectations were for him. Because I thought, well, I think he can be a good blocker. Maybe he catches every now and then, but I don't know if you're making the big plays with him necessarily. And yet, he has shown an ability to do that. And whether it's on a crossing route or a corner route, no, he's not the route runner that Kenyon Sadiq is. He's not going to go line up in the slot, get matched up with a nickel, and beat him to the inside with a slant. Like, that's not what he brings to the table, but he has done a good job blocking, and he has been really good in the pass game. That leads me to this SSA that says Jamari Johnson is the X factor in a deep playoff run. So the X factor, that's a big title. That's a big title. X factors are tough in football because there's so many. You got 22 guys plus specialists. A lot of guys. It's hard for one to be in it. Not impossible. Jamari Johnson is the X factor. I mean, he's shown an ability to make clutch plays, to be important in the run game as well. When he and Sadiq struggled in run blocking for, I think it was the Minnesota game, Oregon didn't always have, maybe it was Wisconsin. I think it was Wisconsin, yeah. Oregon didn't always have the offensive success that we've become accustomed to. Some of that was also, it was raining and swirling winds and the ball was really, really hard to grab. But Jamari Johnson is the X factor. I'd put this number higher if it were an X factor. Because when I hear X factor, I think of someone who has been capable, but maybe has a next gear. What is Jamari Johnson's next gear unless Kenyon Sadiq is out? If Sadiq doesn't play, well, yeah, suddenly he becomes wildly important because Stein has always done a good job using the tight ends in the passing game, both down the field and in the screen game. And of course, they're really important in the run game as blockers. So if Sadiq were to re-aggravate an injury, yeah, suddenly it does become, I don't think Jamari Johnson could be any lower than the number 3 X factor on this Oregon team. But if Sadiq is there, I think the X factor is someone on the defensive line. Frankly, I think it's Malcow Uyunglele, who has just been so close all season. If he starts finishing sacks that he's just right there to make and just has not been making them consistently, if he starts doing that, I think that's the number 1 X factor that comes in my head when I was thinking about this. Like, what's the biggest X factor? Like, if Malcow could finish some sacks, he makes the TFLs, he doesn't get beat, he's been much better against the run. Mateo's a good player. But if he starts becoming the full potential Malcow Uyunglele, man, that Oregon defense suddenly looks incredibly good. So I'd probably have this one at about a 3.5. I'll go 4. I'll bump that to a 4 because I understand the point that you're going for. It's just at tight end, your impact can be a bit limited. And if Oregon gets their wide receivers back, I think his role will recede statistically in terms of what he does catching passes. I think he'll still be on the field in plenty of run blocking situations, but I don't think you'll see him, having a 3 catches for 60 yards sort of game if DeCorian Moore and Gary Bryant and Evan Stewart all come back, because I don't think Oregon will throw the ball to tight ends as much. And I don't think they'll not do it. I just think right now there's an element of necessity, and that goes away if 3 wide receivers come back and get healthy. But I like where your head's at there. Another SSA, Marshall Malcow is the best GM in all of college football. Got to think about this one for a sec. And I don't want to give you dead air because that's, going back to my sports radio fundamentals, dead air is the number 1 enemy of success. You can't have it. You can't have, like Bill O'Reilly, can't do it. Can't do it. We'll do it live. All right, I'm done. So I showed that to someone for the first time earlier today. I don't know how you haven't seen that. It's one of the funniest things ever. Marshall Malcow is the best GM in all of college football. Boy, I'd have a hard time putting him outside the top 5. I can't say I've done a statistical deep dive on every single GM in college football, but the reason that I'm entertaining this in a serious way, despite it being a big statement, is look at the way that Oregon recruits and look at the way they bring in transfers and how effective those guys have been. Let's take just a brief trip down memory lane and go to Oregon's 2025 transfer portal class. Not high school class. Okay, James Ferguson Reynolds, how we doing? Good? Yeah, doing great. Jaden Kennedy, great. Not good, great. Emmanuel Prenon, stud. Mekhi Hughes, not good enough to beat out the true freshman. Wish that guy well when he winds up finding a new home somewhere. Malik Benson just clutched the entire month of November. Bear Alexander once again showed that Dan Lanning and his staff defensively are way ahead of what they've got down at USC. Isaiah World has started at left tackle, has been good all season long. Jamari Johnson, I just said enough about him. Alex Harkey, that's worked out really well. Theron Johnson, probably the least impactful transfer on here after Mekhi Hughes. And I don't think Theron Johnson's been great. I don't think he's been terrible necessarily. I like Iffy more, but they're going to keep playing him, so he's a heavy rotation guy at least. So Mekhi Hughes is the biggest whiff of this transfer portal class because the other guy is Dylan Thieneman, and that guy looks like an All-American caliber player. So when you think about a GM and what he does in the modern world of college football, yeah, it's all of the talent acquisition. And look how many true freshmen are playing as I scroll through the 2025 class. Cooper Perry and Jordan Davison and Dier Hill and Nasir Wyatt and, of course, Brandon Finney and Naeem Offord and DeCorian Moore. The best GM, I don't know who I'd rather have. Like what's the next level? What am I waiting for from a GM standpoint and putting the roster together? So that's a big statement, man. The best GM in all of college football. I'll put that at a 9. That's a 9 on the SSA. Last one, tinfoil hat level SSA for you. I'm here for it, man. Could Cal be purposefully delaying the Tosh hire? It officially got announced on Thursday to stick it to Oregon after everything that happened with the old Pac-12. Reason being, why is it taking so long to hire him when it took Kentucky a day when we've been hearing about Tosh going to Cal for a few days and getting close to a week? Yeah, it did take longer than Will Stein. There are about 1,000 different factors at play, and if Cal were at all upset about the Pac-12 downfall, Oregon's not the school they're mad at. Did you know that UCLA is paying Cal something in the neighborhood of $10 million a year because they're both part of the UC system and they were supposed to stay together and then they didn't, of course? They call it calimony. Yes, UCLA pays calimony every year. They're not upset at Oregon, so that's a 1. But that's okay. I respect the thought. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.